Welcome to Why Is Everything So Ugly? We're going to figure it out. So excited to have everyone here. What should I say? We've put this event on, before I get to introductions or anything, we really want to thank Katie and Megan in particular at the Center for Architecture. This is a very exciting first, for sure. This is a very exciting first, but hopefully not last, collaboration between the Center for Architecture and N+1. We're thrilled to be part of Archtober, our favorite month.
Happy Archtober to all who celebrate. Happy Archtober.
I hope everybody celebrated Archtoberfest this weekend. Yes, so N+1 is a magazine. It's on your chairs. That's for you to take home. Kind of a really good deal, in my opinion. But what do? We publish political essays, criticism, fiction, poetry sometimes. One of the essays we published a couple of years ago was called Why Is Everything So Ugly? It was about why everything is so ugly. It was written by Lisa Borst at the end here and myself.
This is Mark Krotov. It's actually Marktober.
Yeah, it's Marktober. Thank you. Yes, and so we'll do introductions and we'll talk about everything else, and we'll have time for questions. And if you really feel like a burning need to interrupt us, don't, because this is being recorded, and if you don't talk into a mic, we're not going to know what you said. So just wait until the end. My name is Mark Krotov. I'm the co-editor and publisher of N+1. I'm also one of the co-editors of our new book, The Intellectual Situation, an anthology of the magazines, the best of our second decade. It's available for sale out there. Magazines are available out there. Subscriptions are available out there. Please, I encourage you to take advantage of all these things. Lisa, you've just met. This is Blair McClendon to my left. He is a writer for many fine places, including N+1, 4 columns, so many others. Great, read everything. He's also a film editor. He's edited films that you have seen and know about, like After. Sometimes you say that and it's like, okay, film editor. He edited After Sun. Yeah, they show that on the plane. Next to him is Mariana Mogilevich, editor of the incredible website Urban Omnibus, which I assume everybody here is already familiar with. Writer, critic, historian, incredible visual semiotic genius, as we'll get to in a little bit. To Mariana's left, Dushko Petrovich Córdova, painter, professor, writer, fragrance expert, incredible hat wearer, the list goes on. That's us. Let's start.
Cool, great, awesome. So we're going to be talking about the big question of our times, I really think. One thing we sort of were thinking about as we assembled this fine group is that we wanted, not just people who think and write about aesthetics abstractly, but also who are active practitioners. So everybody here makes things, makes different kinds of things, except for me and Mark. I guess we make a magazine, and I don't think it's ugly. To that end, I think the goal is to have a conversation that's both very general, even abstract, but also ideally punishingly specific about each of our areas of expertise. Cool. So the sort of occasion for the conversation, again, as Mark said, is this essay we wrote in 2022 that took up this question kind of in a local and also general way. This is a photo Mark took near our office in Greenpoint. They don't have these everywhere, but I think you can sort of get a sense just from this photo of what kinds of ugliness we're even starting to talk about here. Architectural, but also artistic. You want to?
Yeah, semiotic, intellectual, retail-oriented, light-focused. We're going to be talking about lightness and darkness later on. I think we felt we kind of part of this is, of course, inevitably about Instagram. So Instagram-oriented would be a very important category of ugliness. This thing, I mean, you kind of don't have to listen to us.
How did it happen?
How did it happen? How did it happen in 8 radically distinct ways? Nobody knows the song. Yeah, but we were interested. We're obviously not the first people to point out that things look like shit, but we did sort of feel, partly we felt frustrated with the sort of sometimes narrow range of interventions that one sees. You kind of say, oh, well, things look ugly, and then the zoning bros are like, it's about zoning. And then you say things are ugly, and the NIMBYs are like, it's because people are building too much, and the YIMBYs are like, it's because they're not building enough. And and then of course the tech critics are like, I don't know, they're like, our Apple Watch will solve it. And so, because you just have to look at it all the time. So this all felt unsatisfactory. And I think that the more that we would see it, and we saw it in movies, we saw it in book covers, we saw it in industrial design, and I think that we became convinced that we had diagnosed, or were trying to diagnose, a spiritual crisis. That's what we're here to solve tonight.
Yeah, I think something else we were responding to was this kind of materialist/spiritual mismatch between what feels like a kind of consumer landscape that's so oversaturated, just producing endless stuff all the time. But you're like, how is there so much stuff, but so little of it looks very good? But also, if so much stuff is being made for the very rich, why is their taste so bad? You would think that the ruling class could design a built environment that was a little more seemly. But yeah, in writing, it's like there's a lot of influences we were drawing on, a lot of great. There's a long tradition, I think, of writing about the way things look in an intelligent and left-wing way. Methodologically, we kind of tried to follow the sort of situationist walk around, drift around Paris kind of method. So the essay proceeds as a sort of stroll through ugly New York. But we were also, we were reading a lot of Barth at the time, mythologies, kind of taking this sort of psychedelic semiotic approach that identifies that basically no object is too small or stupid to be worthy of real scrutiny. We were reading some Engels. He walks around Manchester. And then, another big influence in a sort of different political, intellectual, traditional vein is H.L. Mencken's Libido for the Ugly, which has this kind of grumpiness and crotchetiness that I think we were really inspired by. Okay, I'm just going to read a paragraph from the essay, if that's all right. I think it's a good paragraph. And again, you can read this actually not in the issues that were on your chair, but but you can read it in the Intellectual Situation book that's outside for $20. Okay, so we're talking about kind of 5/1s. For all the air these buildings have sucked up in the overstated conflict between YIMBYs, who recognize that new housing is ultimately better than no housing, and NIMBYs, who don't, the unmistakable fact of cardboard modernism, that was one of our many coinages, is that its buildings are less ambitious, less humane, and uglier than anyone deserves. They're also really gray. The Josh is a building we made up, but it again should be familiar to all. The Josh's steel railings are gray, and its plastic window sashes are a slightly clashing shade of gray. Inside, the floors are made of gray timber core, and the walls are painted an abject post-beige that interior designers call grayish, but is in fact just gray. Gray suffuses life beyond architecture. Television, corporate logos, product packaging, clothes for babies, direct-to-consumer toothbrushes. What incentives, material, libidinal, or otherwise, could possibly account for all this gray? In 2020, a study by London's Science Museum Group's Digital Lab used image processing to analyze photographs of consumer objects manufactured between 1800 and the present. They found that things have become less colorful over time, converging on a spectrum between steel and charcoal, as though consumers want their gadgets to resemble the raw materials of the industries that produce them. If the man in the gray flannel suit once offered a warning about conformity, he's now an inspiration, although the outfit has gotten an upgrade. Today, he's the man in the gray bonobos, or the man in the gray Buck Mason crew neck, or the man in the gray Mack Weldon sweatpants. all delivered via gray Amazon van. The imagined color of life under communism, gray has revealed itself to be the actual hue of globalized capital. The distinct national colors of the imperialist map of the world have merged and blended in the imperial global rainbow, wrote Harten Negri. What color does a blended rainbow produce? Grayish.
Before we get to the real intellectual core of this, which is the three people to my left. No offense to us, but we already wrote this thing. I wanted to read just a quick paragraph about from the piece about New York. Obviously, we're a magazine based in New York. We live here. We tried to the problem with this is you can see it basically anywhere, but it doesn't necessarily have a saxophone elsewhere. This might be distinct to Fulton Street. But we did want to sort of pay particular attention to what was happening in this city, and so I think we're gonna be pretty general, geographically general over the course of this. But I did want to shout out our beautiful, ugly home. After New York replaced the sodium vapor lights in the city's 250,000 street lamps with shiny new LEDs in 2017, the experience of walking through the city at night transformed almost overnight. Forgiving, romantic, shadowy orange gave way to cold, all-seeing bluish white. Again, environmental concerns necessitate this scale of change, and again, we wonder why, when it comes to light bulbs, New York has chosen to back the blue. Inertia, disinterest, thoughtlessness, yes, but also the promise of increased police vigilance. Still, what is most striking about New York's ominous glow-up is the sense that the city has been estranged from itself. The hyper-precise shadows of every leaf and every branch set against every brick wall deliver a Hollywood unreality. New York After Hours now looks less like it did in Scorsese's After Hours, and more like an excessive set-bound 60s production. The new ugliness is defined in part by an abandonment of function and form. Buildings afraid to look like buildings, cars that look like renderings, restaurants that look like the apps that control them. New York City is a city increasingly in quotation marks, a detailed facsimile of a place. Well, okay, so that's what we did. But now let's turn it over to our panelists. We wanted to kind of start by asking, you all work, as Lisa said, you make things, and you are thus inevitably engaged with ugliness in your professional lives and probably your non-professional lives at various moments. Can we start with maybe just a general question that I'll pose to Blair first, because he's right next to me. Can you locate a working definition of ugliness that works for you, and also where do you see it in your practice?
Can you hear me? Maybe. A working definition of ugliness. I guess I work across fiction and documentary, and I've never worked in television. That's not true. I lifted a TV on a set once. So I'm going to not talk about TV because it's too easy to say it's ugly. I think in documentary, which maybe we'll talk a bit about later, ugliness often appears as a way to validate that you really are somewhere important and urgent. A very common thing people do in a technical sense is hire a cinematographer from the fiction world to shoot in the documentary world. And if any of you can imagine taking a, say, magazine photographer who works on sets and asking them to produce The Americans, it goes about that well. And then in fiction, we'll get to it perhaps a bit later, but I think ugliness basically, maybe this isn't a definition, but it's the result of the abandonment of craft as something that actually matters. And I'm talking mostly about Hollywood here. It's a little too easy to be like, Iran makes pretty cinema. It's the abandonment of craft, and with it is sort of the abandonment of real things. And I mean that in the most basic and boring sense possible, which we'll see later, which is just like, if you need to shoot in a warehouse and the background is a warehouse, why not just have it be a warehouse? Why go to a warehouse, put a green screen inside the warehouse, and then animate a warehouse in your warehouse? In which case now the light looks confusing because you've made two different warehouses in your warehouse. So maybe ugliness is that. It's making two warehouses in a warehouse.
Mariana, can you talk about craft, maybe, or anything else you want to talk about. But it occurs to me that you deal with buildings, some of which probably are not well crafted, and that might be part of the problem.
Yeah, that might be part of the problem. I mean, maybe I can find my way to craft. Thinking earlier about maybe not like why is everything so ugly, but what is ugly and what is the aesthetic category of ugly in the physical city today. I think first I just want to say, professionally, it feels like a very hard question. One, because I think your essay sort of already laid out very clearly for us in the urban scene all of the things that we might point to and talk through. So it's kind of like, okay, done. And maybe we'll point to some of those afterwards. But I'd say also, since a lot of my job is specifically ignoring ugly things and trying very, very hard to find not ugly things to point to sort of help architects be better people and designers, to be forced to refocus and sort of look for that is very challenging. So thank you, I guess. So I was trying to figure out, all right, well, what is ugly? What is that question? And I think where I ended up right before we started is maybe rephrasing it as a question, what even is this as the category of ugly? Which I think, we see, maybe I'll point to in two different ways in our contemporary built environment, and I'll be really specific to New York, but some of it is not. So one is, I think you talk about in the Josh, and we see everywhere the really incredibly ugly prefab cladding that bedeckles so much of contemporary construction. And so two forms of what even is this. I think there, it's not even a question of craft, but a question of composites and a real material. Like, what even is this? Like, when a material is something whose origins you can't trace in any way, and composition is just completely unreverse engineerable, let's say, from a visual point of view. That's one really clear form, I think, of ugliness. That's just like, what are you? And similarly, at the level of building an institution, the sort of question of what even is this if you can't find any clues of so much sameness, right, that it's impossible, let's say, to identify a function in relation to a building. So cladding, again, I won't get super into it, but there's a sort of interesting debate right now around recladding public housing buildings in the city, right? That brick used to be ugly, and so let's, because it's ugly, but also for other reasons, let's cover up the brick in this, modern and very gray cladding that is also ugly, that's led to this, well, actually, this is ugly, maybe the brick wasn't ugly, but what's really ugly, and this is where maybe I'll reject, I don't know if I am. I don't think I am a semiotician, and I think I'll also play the role of, architects taking things super, but this is very serious. That more ugly than the appearance of things is the way that things that you can't identify mask really confusing and more insidious conditions underneath them. So in that case, right, that idea of, well, I don't know what this building is anymore because actually we don't know who's responsible for it anymore because it's not public, is where the real ugliness lies. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
That was my turn. Okay. So painting obviously plays a minor role in all this, I'm happy to say. But I do think that painting also has a special role in the sense that it is the place where one might, even in an ugly situation, expect there to be some beauty. Like, it would be the place where that would be the point of all that's going on. And it's a complex thing to trace, but I think one of the sources of ugliness in painting and contemporary painting was paradoxically the discovery of how meaningful ugly painting could be, and a certain amount of excitement around that, and around a thing which some of you who have gone to art school probably heard about or practiced, which was called de-skilling, which was again like a kind of not just an abandonment of craft, but a euphoric abandonment of craft, like an embrace of uncraft and things like that, which it's true that ugliness works in painting as a kind of carrier of meaning, that it doesn't work that way in other things like architecture or fashion or something like that. I don't think maybe fashion, less so in architecture. But my feeling is that with the de-skilling and the understanding that ugliness could carry meaning, that also brought in so much just straight up bad, horrible, meaningless painting, which has then also been, it's just like a kind of placeholder. We're going to get into more of this later, but it's a speculative object. It's an object that often hasn't been made to have its own life of meaning and existence and attention, but it's just a kind of market placeholder that was made with an artist's understanding of what an investor might think was an investable work, right? So there's this kind of another thing too of where it can't be reverse engineered. So it's like an artist's bad idea of what an art collector would want to invest money in temporarily before they then resell the work. And so it tended to a kind of bland and edgy at the same time, kind of generic language for painting, which then was placed inside all of these buildings. I mean, proverbially, it's like above the couch, right? Like, so above the resting place, and the home is supposed to be a place of beauty, and now it's just a place of like ugly, speculative garbage. So that's painting.
Mariana, do you feel like bland and edgy captures something about ugly architecture also, or would you use different adjectives?
Bland, yes. Edgy, maybe not. Maybe edgy in like a sticking out kind
Buildings
of
have
elbows,
edges.
not quite fitting together way. I mean, yeah, we didn't get to the sort of craft piece, but things not coming together quite right is a salient characteristic of ugliness in architecture.
Could you discuss this a little more? As you know, I'm very interested in seams recently.
Yes.
So.
Well, let's see. And coming back to craft, and running into the danger of calling out specific sites,
Don't tell anyone. Okay.
Can you go back to the saxophone building?
No, this is actually this is a very different site. This is the name is escaping me, but the new enormous Hindu temple out in Robbinsville, New Jersey, which is a site of not just spiritual but touristic pilgrimage, because I think it is the second largest temple of its kind in the world, and definitely since the American Dream, the biggest and most impressive thing that's been built in New Jersey. And so it's, and its claim to fame is traditional craft, right? Immense amounts of hand-carved marble and other stone ornament. But what you see most clearly is the way that that's been overlaid on very contemporary construction, where you can see right behind it all kinds of seams and glue, and the non-craft backing the craft sticking out very, very clearly. So I think, that way of things not quite fitting together, which is about certain kinds of modular construction also, and the kinds of things that seep through, right? Like then you get mold, that's pretty ugly in its own way. Leaks, all of these things are issues when your seams don't fit well together.
Blair, this calls to mind, I know you didn't want to talk about TV, but just briefly, I feel like a couple of years ago on the final season of Game of Thrones, somebody's Starbucks cup was in the shot, right? They just left it in there. And I guess, can you talk, and this happened in Barbie, right? Was this, yeah.
Little Women also had like a
Women,
water
not
bottle
Barbie.
in it?
Yeah, it's kind of worse there, yeah. They didn't have
that
Starbucks then. Can you talk about this like feels like an ugly phenomenon to me somehow. Not to be like, oh, everything is ugly. But can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean, the answer, which probably will be my answer in almost every instance, is that the ugliness is just downstream from really bad labor conditions, which is, sorry for anybody here who's worked on a set, I'm going to be very boring and explain something. If you're on set, there is a person whose entire job is to just stare at the monitor all the time and attempt to walk up to the director right before they do something and say, hey, the water was actually 3/4 of the way up in the last take, and in this take it's halfway down, so it's just like, that's not going to match. And half
What's their title?
Now I can't remember. Well, if there's not enough money, you make the script supervisor do it, who's actually supposed to be making sure that the dialogue stays the same and matches. But anyway, there's supposed to be somebody there who's just like, I'm looking at it. And the director often ignores them because who cares about the water level? But in theory, if something really bad is happening, they're like, there's a Starbucks mug right there and we should move it. And then, it goes through a very lengthy post process where many people look at this frame for many, many months. And generally at some point you say like, hey, there's a Starbucks thing in here. And now what you would do is just call up the VFX team and say, can you paint out the Starbucks cup because we really want to use this take for some other reason. But as I'll get to later about why Hollywood movies are very ugly now, basically everything in big Hollywood movies now has just been shunted down to the VFX team. Quite unsurprisingly, they're basically the only people in Hollywood who are not unionized, and everybody else is, which is why backgrounds of warehouses are now done by the VFX team, when before you would have the art department make the art. If you need something painted out, you'll have the VFX do it. What used to be the beauty shot where they'd put Vaseline over the lens whenever you did a close-up of a woman in the 40s, now you have a VFX team who's in charge of that. But what it also means is just that what used to be, 9, 10, 11 departments is now one department. They are the last department to work, which means there's not very much time left. And they're just being screamed at all the time by the producers. Everybody else is done working on the movie, basically. And everyone's like, you have 2 weeks, and we need the movie to have a massive alien battle in it, as well as no Starbucks cups. And obviously, it's hard. They don't really pull it off very well. Disney, who has never employed me, so I'm perfectly fine saying their name, I think they control like 35% of the box office every year now. And also are notorious for like not paying VFX companies for like a year or two. And so basically Marvel comes out and then whoever did the VFX on that goes bankrupt. Which is just like, it's not a great system to set up for make sure you're looking at this image and that there's no Starbucks in it. So yeah, I mean, the real answer is just if you have 3 people whose job is to animate things, basically be in charge of making everything in the frame, they will miss a bunch of stuff. I mean, that's always been true. In Mean Streets, there's a guy just standing in the back. He doesn't know why he's there. But it's just become sort of exacerbated by the fact that there's 3 people who sit on a computer and are supposed to do everything now.
Should we move on to paintings, or is there a little more to?
Yeah, I think we should get to our
okay, great.
our
The main
sharing
event.
with the class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dushko, this is your
my images.
material. Yeah.
We've asked everyone to bring one representatively ugly image from their area of study.
2 was acceptable too.
Oh, that's true. Actually, in fact, they're all sets, really. But everyone gets one slide. Cool. Dushko?
Okay, I'm going to try to make it count. So this is just a slide actually from a 2014 Jerry Saltz piece where he popularized the term zombie formalism, which was actually a term that Walter Robinson coined in another less famous piece. There were many terms, and Jerry Saltz does a good job actually of listing all the different terms for this kind of fake, edgy, bland artwork that was being made by many, many artists. And not only was it being made, it was selling, it was circulating, it was supposedly, investable art. I don't think much of it is. I think much of these investments just crashed. But it was also called crapstraction, which I think is similar to cardboard modernism. And then there was gendered, I think it was like dickstraction, and I forget. There are other versions of it. But if you trace the sort of critical lineage of it back, David Jeers had written a piece in October about the neo-modern, which was, like, I think his more kind of historical and analytic term for this kind of zombie formalism, which was just this idea that tropes from abstract painting, which had at one point been radical and considered and much fought and argued over and debated over, were now sort of moving around as zombies in the world of painting, and had just been had lost all meaning as signifiers, and were just kind of randomly assembled. So I don't know if it came to a head in 2014. It may be getting worse and worse, but this was a kind of moment of like group recognition that would happen. And I know Jerry Saltz. It sounds like I'm a big fan of Jerry Saltz. I'm actually not a huge fan of Jerry Saltz. I wrote a very critical profile about Jerry Saltz, but this piece was very good. And Jerry does have a very good method, actually, when he does visits, where he just has a lot of crapstraction on his phone, and then he matches, when he finds a student who's making crapstraction, he just shows them someone else who made that painting or a very similar painting, and then there's a moment of painful recognition of the young art student that someone else has already made this bland abstract painting with like a little green stain here and a little bit of jaggedy black over here, and it's been done, or so. He has it kind of like categorized, so he just kind of like shows them the phone. They probably weep, and then it's a mitzvah. It's like he's done a good thing there by just showing them what they think are making as a kind of neo-avant-garde language of abstraction is just very generic, very bland, and isn't going anywhere. So yeah, it was neo-modernism, zombie formalism, crapstraction. There were like lots of names for this, but it was a very common thing. I think it's been somewhat cut out of art schools. I see it less and less now, but yeah, there are new uglies now that are maybe more complex, but this was definitely a high watermark, I think, of ugly abstract painting.
Without putting you on the spot too much, you're a painter.
Yeah.
Do you, I don't know how much, if at all you want to talk about your recent paintings, but those, to my mind, certainly navigate and explore ugliness in all kinds of ways. And specific or general, I just am curious about as a painter, your methods for, kind of selectively keeping ugliness out and also letting it in productive ways.
Modulating ugliness. Yeah, I've been dealing with a lot of sort of documentary, I guess, sort of nonfiction type visual imagery, including police siren photographs where the photograph sort of blasts, the siren sort of blasts the photograph and you just get this blue, white, black color field. Iraq War night vision stuff where it's all green and fuzzy and black. Recently, the Gaza explosions where the photograph of the explosion is like taking up a big part of the screen. So, as we've been talking about before, like there are obviously deeply ugly underlying conditions that are producing what Marxists are always telling me are mere epiphenomena, the epiphenomena of ugliness, right? So of police violence or, state violence, colonialism, which ones am I forgetting? The patriarchy, the major categories of ugliness that we've all been, fighting against and studying or whatever, do produce I just own the epiphenomena thing now. It's been hurled at me by like a Marxist in the back of the room many, many times, where they're like, "You only understand epiphenomena." I'm like, guilty. But so I'm involved in a very esoteric process of if you then present those ugly epiphenomena in a somewhat distantiated way, decontextualize them, does it produce another kind of reflective experience, which allows for a kind of more, sort of like in your essay, right? Like if you name things and you recognize them, does it produce, hopefully it produces a different experience, a more, what's the word I'm looking for? A verby, like an agent, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an active engagement with ugliness, like maybe not quite an activist position against ugliness, but at least a kind of like, what in therapy they would say is like, connecting the bad emotion to the long repressed event produces initially pain, but eventually it is like a liberatory experience, because then you start to deal in reality rather than just pain that's separated from the ugly phenomena. So maybe I went a little too heavy there, but that's what I'm trying to do.
Should we move on to next image? I think great.
I was really hesitant to do the Avengers because it was too easy. And so I spent a long time looking for basically anything else. And then remembered that Avengers Endgame from 2019, I think I said this in my email to Mark, is undoubtedly the most seen by the most people movie in the last decade. And so if you did want to talk about what ugliness was in movies, this is just the thing people have seen. I actually never watched it all the way through, but I got the idea. So for a long time, I was looking at all the ugly shots in it, and a lot of it had already been discussed. Everything is really dark now because you can hide bad VFX and dark things. All the shots are bad in it. It was easy. So instead, I went back and found this, which I had hinted to earlier. Everything that Marvel does that's like this is basically shot just outside of Atlanta in these massive warehouses. And they have now it's actually even a bigger system, but these massive green screens all the way around. And when I saw these two pictures, which to be clear, Marvel put these out as like press photos to be like, look how cool it is. This isn't like cool guy leaked it to me. Disney was just like, this is good stuff. And I just looked at it and I thought, wow, you guys went into a warehouse, which I don't know if you guys can see at the top. There's a very little bit of the roof that's actually the warehouse roof. And we're like, okay, we've got a warehouse. We're not going to dress this set. We are going to put a bunch of green screens up, and probably 10 months later, we'll recreate a warehouse in our warehouse. I don't really know why they did that, except that there is this real push to control sort of every last piece of the movie and then to test it to death. There's like an old story that sometimes is attributed to John Ford, but it's also attributed to a lot of other people, where they're like, you shoot just what you want so the studio can't change the cut. And the studio was like, what if I literally can change what's in the shot though? Which is fascinating to me because you wind up with, maybe you guys can see it from this projector, but this really uncanny thing where nobody is actually lit correctly to be in the space they are ever in, which if you've ever been to film school is basically the first thing you learn is like how to light a room. And Disney said, what if you just don't have to? Because we're really busy on making this thumbs up a bigger and greener thumbs up. But I do think it actually sort of in the sense of not as dire, but what you were saying about ugliness deriving from an underlying ugly phenomenon. I'm always really hesitant whenever you have a leftist friend who's going on and on about how the Marvel movies are fascist, and I'm like, duh. Like, that's what you bought the ticket for. That being said, I do think there is something, that there is an underlying phenomenon that they are drawing this out of. One being, what if you could pay people very little and destroy their lives, and then you had a movie anyway? But the other is sort of creating this world where movies, which always were collaborative to some extent, therefore a compromise, were basically nobody's vision. They were just this weird corporate vision of whatever a lot of people in a room, a lot of execs who were not on set, decided sounded good. Disney had a really good one recently. They did an interview where, I can't remember the name of the CEO, Bob.
Chapek or Iger?
Iger, when he came back in.
Yeah.
He came back in and he gave a great interview to the Financial Times because recently Marvel movies have been doing poorly, and said, well, what we're going to do now is something revolutionary to try to win people back. We're going to make good movies. And I was like, that's cool. It's also a pretty cool admission that we were just like, for the last decade, we were intentionally making bad movies. But they were making bad movies because they had tested it to basically the end of the world, down to that they will be like, we need there to be an explosion by minute 9 because that's when people start to wonder if the movie is good, and then you hook them again. And basically all of the ugliness that now exists in this, from the fact that there are no real shots to the fact that nobody believes in like 2 people sharing a close-up anymore because that's too hard, is downwind of that the movie should not be some product of an artist's vision, but should be infinitely mutable based on what a bunch of executives think the market is attempting to do, which is how you wind up with people don't like the background, so we changed the background and added a new jet in the back, and that made the movie good.
You talked about, like that sort of to select bad shots on their own would have been too boring. But I did want to ask, is this a medium shot, or is this a wide shot?
I mean, it's
technically?
not really a shot. I guess it's technically a wide shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess, I wondered whether whether there's like an increasing and then you just said that, right, that people you're gonna have, it's harder and harder to find 2 people like in a narrower shot, right? Is the wide shot like a sort of additional security blanket? You can edit more in a wide shot, replace more stuff. There's like more possibility to like add a truck or something.
Yeah, I mean that definitely used to be true. Now they're really going much further than people used to. There's a video that's been floating around for a few years of a medium close-up, so like from the chest up of this guy. I think he's in one of the Spider-Man movies, and the party he's at is CGI'd in for some reason. So they are getting better at, like, even in a tighter shot, let's change the background. But no, I mean, I think the simple answer is people are difficult, and in close-ups, it's the people that dominate, and you actually need somebody to have presence or be able to act or the shot to be beautiful. But in a wide shot, it is, in fact, the environment that dominates, and the environment is what is most mutable for them. So if you can get to this, now you can say, fill it in, let's put, well, actually, their truck's real. Yes. I don't know why they brought the real truck. We'll put the jet in the back here, and we'll put new bars in, and that's good because, see, the bars make an A for America or Avengers, and that's good. So you can do that, whereas in the close-up, you need Chris Evans to be a good actor, which is harder.
Can I ask a labor question? How does this affect filmmaking and skills like downstream from or outside of Hollywood? Like if people aren't being trained to light Hollywood films, do you feel that then in indie filmmaking too?
Yeah, I mean, I will keep this brief. My real defense of Hollywood used to always be the one that's also the attack of Hollywood, which is they have too much money. And Hollywood used to be very good at using that money. And the thing I was talking about when we were preparing for this is the people who made dresses for studios in the 30s and 40s and 50s, those dresses were sold in department stores. If that still were the level of craft they were at, you would go on the Real and be like, I need to buy this Warner Brothers vintage piece. Nobody's going to do that because the clothes are bad in movies. So it has gone downwind of that in the simple sense of a lot of people would pass through that. You had seamstresses who were incredible. You had designers who were incredible. You had people who were lighting this and then obviously would go on and light other things. And now that's just not true. Much like everywhere else, nobody's really trained anymore. And it's not really necessary because it doesn't, you can train people to light, and then you're going to change the light in the background anyway. So yeah, I mean, I think there is like a big downstream effect, which is just anything that briefly touched on the film world before used to at least be held to some standard. It is not, because they don't care.
Yeah, Dushko and I were speaking before this about about a kind of collapse of the, in book publishing, the collapse of the mid-list. In film, like, what people say, the sort of collapse of the movie for adults, right? A kind of romantic comedy or like a drama. And then, Dushko was telling me that sort of in painting, on the kind of art market, that this increasingly holds too. And that feels related to this as well, that in some sense the studio would have been responsible for that giant middle, and now there is no middle, right? There's just, all right, let's move on to beautiful diptych. Oh my gosh, sorry, here we go. Mariana, walk us through, please.
Sure. So I think I pulled two examples of maybe downstream ugliness from my phone, or at least the first one. So the first image, as you can see, is a tote bag featuring the vessel that I found at my local grocery store. And I brought it to the conversation. I think I noted when I submitted it, because I don't know what to say about it. And I took this picture more than 2 years ago. It's still there. I think about it. I thought that we should at least, acknowledge an object like the vessel, perhaps taking ugliness to like the extreme logical conclusion of sort of destination suicide. But I really don't know. So I sort of brought it for everyone to maybe like help us with that. And then the other image is from not so far away from that one. This one I actually commissioned like a really nice photographer to document this building for Urban Omnibus, because it felt somehow important to note that it existed and record that for posterity. It's a little bit hard to see everything that's going on in this image, but this is a building out in Corona, very close, like maybe a foot away from the 7. And even though it's a foot away from the 7, it has these incredible balconies, including these inexplicable balconies that don't support anything at the very top. And if you look really closely, you'll also see that you can't access the balconies because all of the doors have been bricked over and they're windows now. And that's because I think somewhat incredibly, whoever developed this building was actually so overconfident that they couldn't market it as apartments where it is, and as beautifully made and located as it is. So they had to pivot, and they turned it into a charter school. So they had to make some adjustments for the elementary school students, such as making sure they couldn't go out onto the balcony, replacing the windows to make it a little bit more soundproof. And yeah, I mean, it's just, and there you have it. Just a lot of exposed guts, a lot of, a lot of questions about what everyone was thinking at all times in the sort of story of this building. And so there you have it. But I mean, I think what it's meant to illustrate and come back to, right, to not just maybe the question of the absence of craft, but maybe in this case, the sort of absence of care and concern altogether, that would lead to this sort of confluence of wires plus outside ventilation equipment plus terraces to everywhere and nowhere. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really do want to know if anyone has any thoughts about the tote bag.
Well, I do want to hear the thoughts about the tote bag, but I guess just one thing I'm thinking about, Blair's point about the sort of total dispersal of responsibility, right? If everybody has the chance to be a veto point and to be, a censor and to be a VFX, a VFX, person in every home, basically, then in some sense you maybe get like a little bit of a situation like the one on the right where, probably the architect or the developer is in a hurry to kind of not, to just sort of move past their failure and say, okay, now it can be a school, let's not talk about it anymore. I think we see this playing out in film right now with Todd Phillips, the director of the new Joker film, kind of trading back and forth in the press about with sort of producers and with the studio, and everybody's like, oh well, he didn't tell us he was going to do this, and then he's like, well, I did tell you it was going to be a musical with these guys, and everybody's right, and then nobody gets to kind of take the blame. But to me, the kind of actually the striking thing in this respect about this diptych is that the vessel actually has this one guy, Thomas Heatherwick, who loves to put his name on things, who loves to be responsible for, who loves to be the man behind the shawarma. I guess right up until the moment that people start jumping, and then it's not his fault. And I guess it's just to say that it's funny to think of this kind of dispersal of responsibility actually coexisting with a kind of somewhat atavistic, like artistic ego presence, right? In film, we have Kevin Feige of Marvel, who's in control of everything, but also responsible for nothing, right? Ultimately, in architecture, there's still this like residual, not quite dead, but on their way, Starchitect model. And yeah, I'm still processing the bag, but that contrast did occur to me.
I do think we should do a little bit of like collective associative close reading of the bag. First of all, I think this is an amazing photo. I love the hand sanitizer in the background. It really like adds to the kind of like dread-filled temporality of this image. I love that they've sort of inverted the like where a tag would usually go, and they've said made in China right on the exterior. I like that you seem to be buying some greens. That's nice. What do you guys think?
Dushko, what do you think? You moved away from New York before Hudson Yards was completed.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually seen it. I'm seeing it now.
Have you seen Megalopolis?
No, I haven't.
I think that's a.
I've tried not to see all this ugly stuff, so my expertise is limited. I think again here maybe painting might have pioneered some of this ugliness in the Monet on a mug thing, which is also this idea, just like you were talking about it, like the architectural version of like, we'll just put some bricks where it was this and make it this other thing and stuff like that. And there's a lot of taking art, and if it works, then why not just put it on everything, right? So put it on some magnets, put it on a T-shirt, put it on a bag, put it on a silk scarf. And I've sort of, I guess, in my lifetime experienced the surge of that. I mean, that's really like what a museum shop is now. Actually, is just all that garbage. And poor Monet, I always feel so bad. They're oftentimes dead artists who have and now that's like Basquiat or whatever on skateboards or whatever. It's just again, like I guess we talked about zombie formalism earlier, but there's this like zombie quality of it, just everything, and like a wonderful radical painting that took years and decades of thought and emotion and intellection to create, then gets like miniaturized, warped, and just like shot out of some machine. So that's what the bag reminds me of. It reminds me of the Monet on a mug kind of phenomenon.
Mariana, do you want to talk about Hudson Yards more generally, or is that too expansive a topic? I'll just note, while you consider your answer to that question, I'll just note that we, in this essay, had a long, I guess, punishing footnote about Hudson Yards that really took up a large part of the page that we...
It was a crazy proportion of footnote to essay.
Yeah,
untested ever before.
Yeah, it ate the thing, so we had to eat it. But Hudson Yards was definitely on our mind as we were writing and thinking.
Gosh, I'm not sure that I do, but maybe to your point or question about for those of us who maybe did see Megalopolis this weekend, and somehow were almost surprised to find that that utopia in the film is Hudson Yards, sort of rendered a little bit more in a biophilic dimension, right? Because there's leaves, but it's basically the vessel, not at the scale of the world, but basically at the same scale as Hudson Yards. So
mini park.
Yeah, exactly. So there was something again that I don't know what it means, but I was surprised there to find that version of utopia not only looked like this, but also had no ambitions beyond that scale. So there was something about the circumscription of it all standing for everything that is notable, but I don't think that helps us too much.
Can I make try to do a little bit of synopsis to the end of a question, which is that I feel like in all of these accounts of ugliness, I'm hearing the same prefix a lot, which is de. We're talking deunionization, de-skilling, decontextualizing. Even I think there's a sort of built into the phrase zombie formalism, a sense of death or afterlife or something. And I wonder if there's a shared feeling that there's something about ugliness that has to do with a kind of negation of prior conditions, or a ruining of something that has previously been, if not utopian, at least functional or skillful. For example, this idea of an ugly building becoming a charter school. To me, charter schools are the central metaphor for a good public thing kind of being privatized. So I just wonder, this is a sort of wavy question about ugliness's relationship to time. Did things used to be less ugly?
I think in movies, certainly things used to be less ugly. Something I sort of think about a lot and have yelled about a lot and tweeted about a lot is about how movies used to be sexy and they're not anymore. And I'm really annoyed because I think it was Ross Douthat published an essay in the Times about why they're not sexy. And he was like, because women talk a lot and also China. And I was really mad because that's not the answer. He was onto something partially when he was like, women talk a lot. But what he was onto is the inverse, which is that in the last periods of real mass upheaval around gender roles in public and in society, movies often got sexier. Mostly because the movies were something weird is happening, and there's a chance for us to do something sexy at the weird place. The one I always think about is The More the Merrier from the 40s, which is just about when there's a housing crisis in DC because of the war, and so this woman has to have two men be her roommates. Hijinks ensue. And obviously happens again in the 60s. So I don't really think it's that women are talking a lot is what made the movie stop being sexy. And the China thing, I don't really understand what he thinks China's doing. But I do think sort of to the things used to be different and the conditions were different is sort of why I mentioned earlier that Disney is a third of box office now. And somehow everybody forgot that when we were children, Disney made their stars wear purity rings. Those seem related to me. So I think there is a part of it which is just in a different realm, there's the Mike Davis's last essay where he's like, never has so much power been concentrated in so few hands, and then mourns that there aren't more assassins anymore.
Get those guys to the vessel.
We should get those guys to the vessel. And in a similar way, it's like actually nobody's responsible, but power has been concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. None of those hands are any of the people who actually make the movies. And they're people who are mostly concerned with something else entirely. I mean, my sort of last thought on this is when they were making The Eternals, which also was ugly, Kevin Feige was like really lauding Chloe Zhao because he said she really insisted that we shoot with real backdrops. And she showed me some test footage of a sunset. And I said, wow, this isn't from our team. And I just thought, wow, we've reached a point where like a photo of a sunset is like a real step up for beauty. It used to be like, please don't show me a photo of the sunset. But that really is just like power has been, for an entire like wave of films for a decade, is concentrated in the hands of a man who's never seen a photo of a sunset before.
If you don't mind, I'll just add a thing about, as a non-filmmaker, it just struck me that one of the tragedies here is that, of course, like films are like where we get our that's how we dream together, that's how we imagine things in the world that we don't experience directly. I think painting used to play that role more, but now clearly film is where that happens, and so. When beauty and sexiness or whatever have been eliminated from that realm, it's not just a problem of like Saturday night or whatever. It's really a problem of like what our visual imagination is. And I guess, within like the esoteric space of contemporary painting, I think there's maybe a kind of almost even giving up on beauty or giving up on the idea that in a world that's just so wrong and ugly that painting could do something, or such a small, moment spatially, and people spend very little time with paintings, with artworks generally. And my counter argument to that is that, yeah, but actually that encounter, normally gives you a kind of ceiling for what the dream is, or what the vision is, or what the kind of exquisite qualities that can exist if concentration and creativity and everything are applied collectively. So that's just what I was thinking, is like the kind of dream quality, and that I think a lot about how we've just stopped being able to dream of futures that are beautiful, or things like it's harder and harder, seems like. So that seems like one of the places where this is really hitting us.
I'm glad you brought up beauty, because that was a term that loomed really large for us as we were writing the piece, but that we pretty consciously avoided. And then after it was published, we did hear from a number of people who were like, what about beauty? What about the opposite of ugliness? I think part of our hesitation was that, especially in the realm of like architecture and specifically housing, it's like there's a short line between talking about beauty and sounding like a fascist. But yet with more time from the essay, I'm like, we did forget about this major aesthetic category. But I sort of wonder, Mariana, if you think there could be a beautiful architecture that would also be like dense and like up for our housing problems, but also more generally, I wonder if you guys think there are things that are getting more beautiful. If we can like categorize things that are getting uglier, like product packaging and electric toothbrushes and stuff, I wonder if there are similarly, medium-sized categories of things that are getting less hideous.
Can I go backwards?
Yes.
Because I was like my first impulse trying to think of ugly things was like, wait, but like what isn't? And I did, but hold on, like there must be somewhere that just does. And I found two, that probably we can debunk really quickly, but that I found harder to pull really immediate examples. And the first one feels maybe very corny, but I had a hard time doing a catalog of new and existing public spaces and landing on something truly ugly. And then I tried food. And that was also a little bit difficult to locate ugliness in food. Like maybe I didn't try hard enough, and on the way over I thought, well, maybe Van Leeuwen ice cream would be one thing that I would put in the ugly food category. But I mean, I think, I think there's something there about utility and use value, and we haven't used the word, but I know when we talked before, thinking about production value, which maybe we can still think about in terms of beauty. So that was one thought, starting in the opposite direction, that there are maybe some things that feel not terribly ugly, or no matter what, they're interesting, let's say, in a different way. I think maybe not especially, but the question of that kind of beauty in architecture does feel really dangerous and an invitation to the most retrograde of opinions, because the minute we start saying, oh, well, before things weren't ugly, we're just in really, sad territory, whether that's, like Ruskin territory, or whether that is, like make government buildings classical and great again. So in a way, like it does feel like the stakes are kind of high to find a contemporary beauty, or to not locate it in its sort of past. Maybe coming back to not exactly craft, like I'd say the one place I'd look for that, or if we're gonna say like what's different about architectural ugliness today, lifespan, endurance, not so much, right, whether it's beautiful in any other way than is it expected to last more than 20 years, is probably where I'd locate it. Because all the other stuff that we don't think is ugly anymore, we mostly appreciate it because it's still around. So.
I had a thought about the beauty ugly, like, or what's that called, dialectic or binary. I'm reading this book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, which has this great thing about depression, where she says the opposite of depression, most people think it's happiness, but it's actually not happiness, it's vitality. And so, I think the opposite of ugliness is not necessarily beauty, actually. It's something like vitality or responsiveness or durability or something like that. There are other ways that, like, responding to the current situation produces something which is not ugly. That would be because you're right, like beauty as a like abstract category tend toward already done, retrograde, established things. Although I would argue that in like a phenomenological daily life experience of beauty, it normally corresponds to unplanned, unexpected new categories of things where you didn't think that, for example, yesterday I saw a painted flamingo in front of some sprinkled donuts, and the light was just like coming through and hitting the donuts and the flamingo. And it was amazing. It was, and of course I never could have dreamed, no committee would have ever sort of gotten there, but it was truly beautiful, and I photographed it and sent it to my daughter. So yeah, I do think that like beauty as like an agreed upon category or whatever is conservative, but beauty when we like just find it in our daily lives is oftentimes really surprising and wakes us up to some new possibility or some long hidden emotion or these different kinds of things. So I'm not totally giving up on beauty, but I'm going to go with vitality.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am a real partisan for things should be beautiful. I think maybe this isn't things are getting more beautiful, but something that has sort of happened as a result of, and this is kind of about the production value thing. When we were preparing for this, I was talking about how the idea of what production value is kind of shifted, and that's one of the things Hollywood always sold, was they had more money and therefore more production value. Their dresses are better, everything in it is better than yours. And and that was a product of people and their labor. I mean, the classic one is Ben-Hur, where you just see thousands of people in the stands, and to pull it off, they put thousands of people in some stands. And that was something that if you were like, you know, I'm making my really cool, independent, Marxist film about the people, Hollywood was like, we have more people. And Hollywood has really just abandoned that terrain entirely, which I do think has had this strange effect of, in addition to some very obvious things about how movies are distributed, of opening up a broader range of films to an American market that for a long time was like very hard to get things that weren't Hollywood into. The one I keep thinking about is how strange it was that those Yang films sold out at Lincoln Center. But actually, like, this movie is beautiful and looks like somebody intended it to be, is a pretty strong selling point for movies now. I mean, it was true, like, even when we were about to put out Aftersun and we're talking about sort of the strategy for that, and part of it was Greg made it look nice, and you might like looking at things that look nice. And it goes pretty far because, you know, we were sort of up against that. And I was like, well, we don't have, I think they're trying to return half the universe to life in this one. And I was like, we don't have that. We've got like a sad girl about her dad. But it looks nice, and the light is correct on both the wall and the face because they're in the same place. And it has actually become like a very obvious sort of way that foreign films, that independent films, which have sort of flipped from being the message is urgent to it's competent, that it has just become a selling point in a way that it wasn't before. Because if you were like in the 50s making your beginning of American independent film and you were like, our film's beautiful, Vincent Minnelli was like, no, it's not. My film is beautiful. And that stopped being true. So I think in some sense, Hollywood abandoning that terrain has actually made it easier to just be like, we got people who like when things look nice, and that will get some amount of people into the room that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to actually compete and get people to do that. But now we just say, nothing looks like that. And it looks more like people working out issues, and that might be okay.
Let's work out some issues together for a few minutes. Katie has got the microphone, so if you have a question, let's start, yes, over here in the third row, yep. And yeah, be sure to talk into the microphone again, because otherwise, you know, this will not be preserved for posterity.
Hello. So I just wanted to bring something up before I ask my question, which is that since Robert Iger was mentioned, it's actually his mentor at Disney who has been quoted to say, as part of his ethos, we have no obligation to make art. We have no obligation to make history. We have no obligation to make a statement, but to make money. And that was Disney's ethos. And that was during the Disney Renaissance, so a time when they were also making genuinely beautiful movies. And I think it's fascinating to say that, like, you can see a trend in ugly along with the, you know, abuse of labor, this consumerism as God, right? This need for creating inoffensive objects to appeal to the lowest common denominator. How many people can we get to like buy this product? And I think it's fascinating, as I think most people would agree that America is a producer of a lot of the cultural zeitgeist of the world, and through that, our consumerism does feel like this ugly. But I find that it's fascinating because I don't think that this plagues as much as other countries and other cultures, and even in the article you mentioned that this is very much a uniquely American thing, and even in other countries or other, you know, economies that are still very consumerism forward, they still have a lot less of this ugly that we have in America, and I find that is due to, frankly, like a cultural identity that is stronger in other regions that America really lacks. And it's fascinating because America doesn't lack cultural identity, but we lack cultural, how do I word this? Togetherness. There's lack of a shared cultural identity that fuels a lot of this like general, you know, poor ugliness. But when you go into like more niche ideas, I think a lot of America has a lot of niche categories where beautiful things happen all the time, but do you think, from your expertise and your experience, that we're kind of doomed to continue to go down this road of like disparate like consumerism and like failure of creating beauty and making statements in this way?
Do I think we're doomed? Well, I mean, I suppose I will defer to the N+1 of the pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. Do I think we're doomed in the short term? Yeah, sure. Things like Disney's not going to make a pretty movie tomorrow. But I guess something I would say is, at least in the question of cinema, is there certainly are places that I think care about artists more than America does, or perhaps places a higher value on them than they do. But I think what's always been true in cinema, like you were saying, is like the bosses always wanted to make a lot of money. But everyone understood that actually movies are a terrible idea if what you're trying to do is make a lot of money, because mostly what you do is lose a lot of people's money. If you are trying to get somebody to invest in your film, the SEC requires that you give them a sheet of paper that says you are going to lose all of your money. This is a high-risk investment. You're stupid. And so everybody has always understood, like, yeah, we're in this to make a lot of money. It's dumb. We're mostly going to lose money. But that somewhere in there, something, because of this weird amalgamation of all of these artists and craftspeople, would produce something that caught people, both sort of in an emotional way, in an aesthetic way, and for the heads of all these studios in their pockets. I mean, the French biographer of Godard always has this phrase that I like to repeat a lot, which is just that he says there wasn't an audience waiting for Godard before Godard. He made the audience for himself. And that thought, I think, has just disappeared from cinema, that like you put a movie out and then that answers the question of whether or not people want to see the movie. Now it's kind of flipped backwards to, we need to find out if people want to see the movie we haven't made yet, which I just think, like, process-wise, that dooms you, because it means you're always chasing something that already happened, in which case, I mean, like, shorthand I always say is I just think it's like a real period of academicism right now, where everybody is actually, like, trying very hard to repeat what they think is a masterful image, but the image isn't that good to begin with. But it doesn't have to be that way. I saw Battle of Chile a little while ago, and in the middle of the revolution, there's this gorgeous shot of a man just running down the street with a cart behind him. So I suppose my answer is, like, if there's an uprising, somebody will probably make something beautiful in the uprising.
Thomas, sorry.
Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Thanks for this beautiful discourse, and you are teaching us all how to see. Normally you teach us how to speak, but now you're teaching us how to see, which is wonderful. And Lisa, my review of Megalopolis is in your inbox. I
Can't wait to, it's, yeah, my treat for after this event.
I plug it to everyone once Lisa has made it good in her brilliance. And what I wanted to invite you to do is summon with me the spirit of the Reverend Mother of all architectural critics, Ada Louise Huxtable, into the room with a few sentences. Man can ruin anything, and does. The shining country that stretched from sea to sea, the skies, the plains, the woods, the spacious fields are now defaced and mutilated, a bauble. Billboards, graveyards of automobiles, googie architecture, subdivision devastation, all the appurtenances and excrescences of prosperity, the population explosion, and the good life. It has been amputation by expressway and slaughter by suburban sprawl. There's much, much more. You have to go back to the New York Times in 1964, the destruction of the city in terms of prosperity and livability as it becomes increasingly repellent under the hands of the speculative developer, the automobile's promise of pleasure and liberation turned into dismemberment. Uglification. So it has a prehistory in the history of architectural criticism. And the reason I bring it up is that there's a moral hazard in talking about ugliness. Those lines from 1964 are from her review of a book called God's Own Junkyard by Peter Blake, who was the editor of Architectural Forum at the time. And there's a very strange thing that happened that I think is disconcertingly relevant for our times in terms of good taste and the performance of class in America. Because Peter Blake, as I understand, worked his way up a system. He was a believer in certain things. And he wrote this book about why is everything ugly in 1964, or an essay really with a photo essay attached. And I think it came from a place of credulity and aspiration and idealism. The problem was, and he wasn't wrong in a way, but the problem was he was such a pearl clutcher and a stick in the mud. I think because he had willed himself into the aesthetics of status in a mid-century establishment, that this snobbery occasioned the response by ingenious, political, cynical, calculating, proto-authoritarian, false populist, corporate subjects called Robert Venturi and his company, who wrote another book 2 years later, or assembled a series of essays, Complexity and Contradiction. And such was the kind of stentorian posturing and pearl clutching of Blake that Venturi could pose as an insouciant pop artist, man of the people. Hey man, it's all cool, everything's all right. Main Street is almost okay, is almost all right. And it's the almost wherein lies the true condescension and the horror and the contempt for the poor. Almost, yeah, it's almost all right. No, it should be all right. And basically this project gave an intellectual pedigree to work that was very cheap. And I think leads us eventually right to the Josh. Like this is the work of 1966. And so it was the perfect tee-up in 64, kind of spun by this amazing critic. And so it's a moral hazard, right? So we're now 2 years later from 2022. Yeah. What's going to happen to your discourse?
Well, yeah, no, I really appreciate this very much. And I should say, too, maybe we'll do one more question, and then we can hang out in this space until 8 p.m. But I want to respond briefly, and then, yeah, we can keep talking, obviously, out on the street, find a beautiful place to sit afterwards. But I think it's very important. We, just as Lisa pointed out, we were very mindful of avoiding beauty because it just sets off the little fascist dial. It's just, and it shouldn't. And in fact, we've gotten powerful arguments for why it shouldn't and how it shouldn't, but it just still does. And one has to kind of be very mindful of. One has to be sort of mindful of the implications. And I think Venturi is in fact a perfect. Is a perfect like person I don't want to be, because in fact Venturi and Scott Brown, they observed some things that I do think should not be rejected. I think that Las Vegas is interesting. I think that the vernacular is interesting. I think it's most interesting when it's photographed by Ed Ruscha rather than celebrated in a sort of faux populist, secretly hierarchical perspective. And so and something that I think that, something that I think in a way that you have to read the piece. I think we were both concerned with not being the Blakes, actually. There is a lot of ugliness in this piece, but we wrote it, there's some jokes in it, and sorry, go ahead.
You should finish, but I was just gonna say, I feel like it's actually, there's a tonal way out of the Blake problem, which is to be funny. That's like why Ruchet works too, you know, because he has a great sense of humor, I think. And I think for every like grumpy line or like Mencken adjacent complaint, we also tried to like say something fun. But
more substantively, I mean, I think that what we're after is is a kind of, you know, this is not the best example of a kind of of like this is trying to be funny, right? It's trying to be cute, and it fails for that reason, because like, you know, a cute thing is cute when it's like, you know, maybe like this big, and when it's, you know, blown up to 30 feet, it can't sustain it. And this is how I feel very powerfully about, you know, Frank Gehry's concert hall. It looks nice on a postcard, and then when it's blown up to those kinds of dimensions, it just feels like completely offensive. And I think people are deluding themselves if they think otherwise. But right. Yeah, the vessel. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. The synthetic answer is that the vessel bag is great. But I just want to. Yeah. But I think the challenge is to write criticism. Yeah, with humor, and to avoid kind of the portentousness and pompousness that are just like right there. You know, they just like want you to take a little dip. You know, and you have to avoid that. But also to resist a kind of architecture, design, visual language that wants to kind of like swim in that humor and in that kind of irony, while actually what it's doing is quite authoritarian. And I think this actually is a very, very narrow lane. It's a narrow lane for criticism, and it's a narrow lane for production. But I'd like to think that the way out actually is vitality, generativeness, kind of like populism, not of the sort of like cheap faux right-wing variety, but like one like general, you know, real space making, right? Like Mariana's point about how public space is in fact, you know, maybe one exception to this is really striking to me, and I think that's a kind of like line that we should explore more and should be encouraged. Anyway, I have more to say, but I did thank you for that. Okay, one last question. Sorry, yes, over here. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Katie, actually over here, and then we can talk over snacks.
Hi. Quickly, I just wanted to mention that in that same Bob Iger interview, he says that the reason...
God, I love that we're all connoisseurs of this. Yeah.
He says that the reason why the Disney movies have been underperforming in the last few years is actually because they were too woke. That was his opinion. But anyway, I was thinking about the two things that were mentioned, the public housing, the NYCHA reclads, and also this idea that an all-gray aesthetic would have been, I mean, it's the idea of what like a communist society would look like, right? I think historically, if we think about like popular opinion of like public housing, wherever poor people live is going to be considered ugly by a lot of people, because that's just how that happens. So what are we going to do now that the neighborhoods where wealthy people live and public housing starts to look the same? And it is that all gray world that we were so fearsome of. And I think everyone's kind of touching on this a little bit, but like, what does this ugliness say about our political moment? Basically that.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. I forgot the main thing that I wanted to say tonight was a quote from Guy Davenport, which is in an essay. I think it's called like "Ugly on the Way to the Airport," where he talks about this phenomenon too of like whenever you land at an airport and then you go to the city, it's always just the ugliest stuff is on the way from the airport. And he has this sentence. I think it's this, but you could find it. It's just that every shape that's not a rectangle is an offense to invested capital, which is like a version of the sequel problem. And like it just needs to be bankable, you know, like bankable is the key thing. So it has to be a rectangle, can't waste any space. And then you just create this ugly, repetitive world. I think also, you know, relating that to the politics, like there almost isn't politics anymore. Like it's just like there's no vision. There's just a kind of squabbling over scraps and things like that. That's like what passes for politics, and it is this kind of like rectangle. Like it's just a rectangle, you know, just the only shape that you could have, and it's just shabby grid. That's the other thing I kept thinking, like the whole thing is a shabby grid. Like you just make a rectangle. We're gonna fix it in post. There's no post, you know. Rachel Ossip was telling me today about this idea called, what's it called? Overshoot, which is this idea in climate, the climate situation, which is that even to make our very meager, 2-degree goals that are going to save us from an apocalypse in climate future prediction, all that has baked in, so to speak, the idea that we will invent the technology that will suck CO2 out of the which we have not invented. So it's just like, again, it's like a we'll fix it in post, like kind of a approach to global warming too, where there's this constant that's why I say there's no politics, like there's just a constant deferral and postponement of anything that feels urgent to us and vital and everything like that. And we all just get used to it because it's coming at us from so many sides, right? It's coming at us from art, film, architecture, politics, like this kind of just already foreclosed upon space where you can't imagine some other shape of something. So yeah.
At the risk of candidity, but also in the interest of thinking locally, Mariana, I wonder if you'd have the last word and maybe talk about, just briefly, part of what you are up to at Urban Omnibus is actually chronicling, social housing and publicly oriented architecture and infrastructure that, I find quite beautiful, and that actually does, for all of its imperfections, take the public as its central mission. And I just, whether it's like an example or just like methodologies that have been evolving, I think that would be, to think about that would be a nice note to end on.
Yeah, well, to turn it back around a little bit, I mean, I did notice, and I think would point out in the essay, I think you have exactly one example of an ugly that's beautiful that you settled on, and it was that sort of passage about the sheds. Right, the sheds, exactly, which I think speaks to, where I will get in that sort of possibility, which I think comes back to the public spaces question, which is, even if the thing itself is a little bit ugly, I think identifying there that kind of space of, there is, I hate using this word, right, but some agency, right, like you could make this film, you could make this streetery, there is sort of room to manipulate things on your own and build something in, whatever your wacky image and desire is. I think is where that, because I was going to say to your point earlier, I'm so sorry, that it's, there's like the beauty utility, but then there's also the beauty complete lack of utility. And there's a weird way that those two, I think, come together in a space like that, which is both like a eminently practical and sort of urgent solution to a small problem, but also this sort of opportunity for, like, we could do this 100 different ways, very modestly, but with a lot of invention. So, I mean, I think, like there's always room for that, but I will also say that so many of those efforts are also very small. So, with like urbanism, it's always the scale question at the end of the day. So, like, yes, locating the small, the hope is always, again, maybe like the vessel utopia, that microcosm will provide a model, to build the world in its image. But maybe just a few more like that is better than nothing.
May 1,000 streeteries bloom. Thank you all so much. We have books for sale. Subscribe to M+1. We'll talk a little more after this until 8, and then we have to leave so that we don't get in trouble. But I'd love to keep this conversation going email us at editors@m+1mag.com. If you don't talk to us tonight, let's just keep, I think we can solve it. Thank you so much to Blair, Mariana, Dushko. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mark.